Sorry, my net. I hope I'm audible now. Am I audible now?
Yes.
Okay. So I was just saying that raise hand will not be very effective in reaching us because we may not be watching that screen, but we will be watching the Q&A screen. We have volunteers on YouTube as well. So the live stream comments will also be, collated and made available to the moderator. So please do type out your questions, any comments that you want to share. We would appreciate that. And welcome to the third session. And over to Min to do the honors of introducing the series RRAN and our moderator today.
Thank you, Gigi. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this very timely session on millets, millets and agro-bio food and nutritional diversity, past, present, and future. My name is Minhaj Amin, and I represent the RRA network, Revitalizing Rainfed Agriculture Network. Our network represents rainfed agriculture and rainfed farmers, which is a predominant way of agriculture in India, and I'll speak a little more about that. And we are currently working on a number of issues that concern with food security, with nutritional security, water stress, and so on. And we believe that the answer to all of these larger challenges may lie with our marginal farmers who are engaged in rainfed agriculture. I don't know how many of you are aware of the fact. If I can just share my screen for a moment to show you one slide.
Yeah, just 1 second, Min. Yeah.
Can everyone see this slide that I am showing?
Yes.
So I don't know how many of us realize that 61% of India's farmers rely on rain only for agriculture. And 52% of gross cropped area is rain-fed. And this is so important for the country because they provide 40% of our rice, 89% of millets, 73% of cotton, 69% of oil seeds, 88% of pulses, 78% of cattle are relying on rain-fed agriculture, 64% of sheep, and finally 72% of goat is grown on rain-fed lands. In addition to that, 71.7 million hectares of land in India is rain-fed agriculture. And most of the people who we really care about, the tribal population, the most marginalized and poor population also lives in rain-fed agriculture areas. I'll stop sharing now. And I see that currently, as a network, we are focusing on soil, like I said, water, millet, livestock, and so on. And we are present as state chapters in many of the key states of the country. And millet is one of the core focus areas. We believe that millets can address a number of issues that we face today, particularly for nutrition and also for the livelihoods of marginal farmers. And I'm really grateful to the Millet Foundation, Duji Guru, who is the founder of that, to take up this initiative of hosting this very informative and useful and timely series of workshops, seminars on millet. And I hope that we all learn a lot from this, and this kind of helps us to create an impetus for more millet farming and consumption in India. My final hope is that at my home, where my daughter is not really inspired by millets today, we are able to create an environment and also, dishes and flavors and so on and so forth with millet dishes, so that people like my daughter and my wife are also able to consume millets. And I would like to also briefly introduce the moderator today, Dr. Shambhu Prasad. He is a well-known figure in our world. He teaches at the IRMA Institute and is the founder of the Incubation Center IC. And recently he co-edited a book on farming futures. With that, I would ask Dwiji to begin his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Min. Just a few housekeeping announcements for the attendees who just joined us either on Zoom or on YouTube. Please type out your questions or comments in the Q&A or in the comment section on live stream on YouTube. We shall not be watching the raise hand feature of Zoom, so please, apologize. Advance apologies for not noticing your raised hands. We will start with a 20-minute presentation by me, and then Dr. Shambhu will be moderating the Q&A. Shambhu sir, you have the spreadsheet with the collated questions, right?
I think it will be on my way. So.
Okay. So okay, so actually, I don't think we shared you the link with you. Okay, you have it. Okay, good. So
Vijay, I don't have it.
Okay. So Fanish or Malaj or Swami, one of you, if you can share that link with
sure.
Dr. Shambhu, that would be great. So the spreadsheet that I'm referring to, folks, is a place where we are collating the questions so that the moderator doesn't have to switch screens and can just look at one screen. So I'll just start my presentation in the interest of time, and hopefully you will be getting the link soon. And you should be able to see the questions as they are coming in. So today's topic, so this is part of a 10 topic or 10 webinar series. So today's, each one is concentrated on or focused on a certain topic. And today's topic is on diversity and the whole idea of how millets fit into the sustainability aspects or bring in sustainability because of its inherent qualities. So, oh yeah, another housekeeping thing. I'm in a reasonably noisy street inside the house, but close to the window. So please accept my apologies whenever there's a vehicle passing by. I'll just repeat whatever I said so that it can be heard over the voice. So I just wanted to contextualize the bringing back of millets into our foods and onto our farms from the perspective of diversities of agrobiodiversity, of food diversity and nutritional diversity, and also look at it from past, present, and future kind of perspective, rather than just look at it in a theoretical way. And can we go to the next slide, please? So this whole next slide business is because my bandwidth is so. So I have asked Panish, my friend, to share his screen with the presentation on it. So as I was mentioning earlier, the series is going to be on different topics, and each session is going to be focused on a certain thing. There's a slide number on each slide. So if you have a question and you feel it's useful to reference a slide, please use the slide numbers so that it's easy for us also to come back to that slide. So we started on the last Monday, or the Monday that went by, which was May 4th, and we are going to end the series on 31st, 3 Sundays from now. It's on every third day, and the schedule is on the website. It's themillet.org/KMW2020. You should put that on the link somewhere here. I'll do that for the next one. So this is this particular presentation. Let's go to the next one, please. We are going to talk about why we should nourish diversity. What is diversity? And also try to understand what is the role of millets in agrobiodiversity, and then to also look at millets and food diversity in terms of sovereignty and security of food security. And when we look at nutritional diversity, I would like to focus on two aspects, because nutritional diversity is one might think is pretty much food diversity, but I just want to bring out a few aspects which are typically lost in this whole discussion of food and nutrition, and what millets have to offer, and also in some sense make the case with regard to the whole drive for biofortification. And then I would like to summarize the presentation. So can we go to the next slide, please? So what do we mean by diversity? First of all, one thing is that there are many aspects or many components to this system, and that's why it's diverse. And we also have a dynamic system, which means that the resource utilization cycles are not static. It's a very alive system where you have things changing constantly, whether we look at oxygen, energy, nutrients. I mean, you take any of these things, the first thing that we come across when we look at sustainability is a cyclical fashion that we expect in all of these. Let's go back. So when we are looking at diversity, we are essentially looking at dynamic and multiple resource utilization cycles and everything that plays a role in such cycles. So it doesn't just mean plants. It doesn't just mean animals. It doesn't just mean humans, but the whole various stakeholders, as one could put it, in this, which would go all the way from microorganisms and viruses. I mean, in today's context, the virus is also part of that whole dynamic multiple resource utilization cycles, and a significant one or an influential one today. So that's what I mean by diversity. And the value of each is not just the intrinsic value, but rather the value as it is derived by its interactions with the others. So just because you have multiple things doesn't mean that each one is part of that equilibrium or part of that utilization cycle. It comes about only when the value of a component is dependent on the others' interactions with the others. And of course, in a very simple way, if all these initial parts were too complicated, the simple take home from this slide is that it's more than the sum of parts. So it's not just 1 + 1 = 2, because it's thousands plus thousands. It's not just 2,000 something, but tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. So that's the idea of diversity that the definition of diversity that I have in mind when I'm referring to whether agro-bio, food, or nutritional diversity. Let's go to the next one. So why do we need to nourish diversity? We need to nourish diversity because it's part of evolution, and somehow because of anthropocentric, not anthropocentric, anthropological interest, we have, I should correct that, industrial interest, commercial interest, we have invariably moved to reducing diversity and making things quote unquote manageable. And now, as the climate crisis hits us, as COVID-19 like pandemics hit us, we realize that actually to manage risk, we have to be able to bring back some semblance of diversity, or at least move in that direction, because it's not working. The way we are trying to reduce diversity to make it more manageable is actually hurting us. So let's go to the next one. So what does it mean when we think of agrobiodiversity? I'll just take a few few points here with to bring in the past into this picture. Now, invariably, we feel that we lived in a much more sustainable world earlier in yesteryears, which is largely true because we have gone so far off the path today. But if you look at it, the agrobiodiversity in agricultural sector in the civilized world, let me put it that way, civilized under quotes, has always been going down. It's only in the uncivilized worlds of the Adivasis and Aboriginal peoples and in some sense the small and marginal farmers who could not afford to do anything else, that you had a sustenance of biodiversity, agrobiodiversity. So what do we mean by agrobiodiversity? We mean the flora, fauna, and the microorganisms. When we are using this particular place as in the space or the land, for production of agricultural produce for human use. Now, the agricultural produce doesn't always and was not always for food. We should also remind that there is this romantic notion that in yesteryears or in age-old, पुराने ज़माने में सिर्फ खाने के लिए करते थे. नहीं नहीं नहीं, बहुत सारे चीजें उगाते थे. Lots of things were grown, including cotton, jute, and lots of different fibers, lots of different dyes, lots of different aromatic plants, herbs, a whole bunch of things. So anything that was produced in a systematized fashion is what we call as agriculture. In such spaces, in such lands where there is a conscious effort to nurture diversity, is what we call as agrobiodiverse or farming. So let's go to the next one. So where do millets come in when it comes to these things? Now, what you see in the photograph here is a beautiful example of a what we call as farming with multiple species or multi-cropping. The foxtail millet is the panicles that you see, and the bushy plant that you see around it are the pigeon pea or the arhar, togri. So the pigeon pea is about to flower, and this thing is already fruiting and ripening actually. So the panicles attract birds, and the birds, once they come in, they're not just going to eat the grains, they're also going to eat the pests on the flowering plant. And anybody who has worked on farms would recognize that it's the fruits of the plant are most tasty when it is flowering. So in that sense, the pest attack is highest, especially among pulses, during its flowering phase. So the timing of the crop is such that the birds are attracted to the foxtail millet panicles, but actually they don't just eat the foxtail millet, they also help in improving the yield on the pigeon pea. So when we look at agrobiodiverse farming, we are not just looking at it in terms of an esoteric ecological purpose, we are also looking at it from the human purpose as well, which is to get a good output and something that will help me survive, me as a farmer. So yeah, did we just jump slides? Yeah, we just jumped slides, Fanish. Can you go back? Yeah. Next one. Yeah. So yeah, we can go to the next one, please. So when we look at food, what do we mean by millets and food diversity? So first, I would like to just highlight, when we say food diversity, I'm looking at this primarily from the cereal grains because we are talking about millets. But largely speaking, food diversity is essentially a balance of different food groups that we identify, whether it is pulses, cereal grains, fruits, vegetables, animal-derived proteins and fats, etc., etc. Oil seeds, of course. So various components. So when we look at millets and food diversity, we recognize that today most of our carbohydrates are coming from high input, extremely sensitive crops, which is paddy and wheat. And only a small proportion is coming from millets, which are actually low input and hardier. So when we look at a planet that is undergoing a change, a drastic change in its climate, we recognize that our food diversity, especially when it comes to cereal grains, let's go to the next one, is extremely tenacious. And right now, if we were to bring in millets into our PDS and not just bring in as in promote, procure, or start procuring, but rather work towards building a production of the scales that are required in order to ensure food security in this country or in the larger human population, then what we see immediately is that dryland farms are going to be supported through such a procurement policy. And invariably, dryland farms are predominantly small and marginal farmers. Some of the data that you were seeing Minhaj share at the start of this session. So millets really make sense in terms of food security and sovereignty also to be included in our PDS and other such things, and to bring back that kind of diversity that we seek in food, not just in our personal foods, in among us, as in I'm assuming that most of the people attending this session are not really dependent on PDS, but are procuring beyond PDS as well for their personal consumption. But even among the community, the vast population that survives on PDS, public distribution system, I would expect that bringing in millets is critical, not just bringing it to the market. So the other reason is that when we bring in that scale of production and procurement, what sets up is localized, shorter supply chains. And this we talked about in the first session on how and why millets and community-centric approach go together, and how that makes sense. So I shall not go back to that. I would encourage anybody who has questions about this to go to the RRAN YouTube channel, and you can find the recording of the first session. And I've dealt with this in a reasonable detail over there. And the discussion was also very informative. So can we go to the next slide, please? So when we talk of nutrition and diversity and contextualize it in terms of past and present and future, what we recognize is that millets were always part of a food diet. They were never like, oh, millets or nothing else. And the reason I say that is that if you look at wheat and quinoa or rice at the bottom of this table here, they do have some green points. Quinoa I just added there because it's a fad, and this is just to compare different millets to the more famous of the grains. So, but what I would encourage you to look at is the various greens that are distributed among the various millet grains, which are each one in a different row: foxtail, little kodo, proso, etc. So the reason I am emphasizing this is that when we say millets, we are not talking about one grain like they did with food security and the green revolution. We are not talking, when we talk about bringing in millets back to PDS and our farms, we are not referring to just one grain, but rather the diversity of the various grains which grow in various places. So let's not, when we look at millets uh, and food and nutrition, let's always remember that millets is just a collective noun and not one particular grain. So yeah, I'm using that in that collective context as well. Let's go to the next one. So why is this important? Why is this nutritional diversity important in today's context? It's important because of this whole push for fortification. And some of you might be aware fortification, but for those who are not, just a very simple definition of fortification is essentially increasing the availability or the presence of a nutrient in a particular food source by using either a biological or a post farm approach, processing approach, to to improve or address a certain nutrition deficiency among the target population. Now, as you can imagine, if we were to introduce individual nutrients into each, let's say there are fortified, meals that are provided. Now, these fortified meals, I mean, the earliest one, I suppose, at least earliest in terms of the modern context, is the iodized salt, where iodine was fortified in regular salt because it was felt that there was a huge requirement for, there was a huge population that was not getting sufficient iodine. So, but what we have seen since is that it is indeed the case that there is a significant population. But blanket fortification essentially ruined the lives and livelihoods of various salt pan workers across various communities, across the country and the world, more so in India. And this is an issue. In the problem with looking at nutrition as individual nutrients is that it loses the, what's the phrase, the forest for the trees. So one invariably is looking for individual things and loses the overall context. And bringing in better or increasing the diversity in our food intake, in our farms, essentially allows us to address this thing in a holistic manner as compared to a reductionist manner which fortification takes up. Now, the other aspect which is important to understand is that fortification invariably is a tweaking. It's small changes that we are trying to do without trying to quote unquote change anything drastically. But the world today has changed so dramatically that our food systems are no longer sustainable. So with small tweaks, forget food system, with the COVID and the people say post COVID, but I like to say in the COVID-19 era, because the COVID-19 is not going to get done with lockdowns. It's not post COVID. Post COVID kabhi nahi aayega. The COVID is going to stay with us. It's a virus. It will stay. It will have its ebbs, but it will have its highs also. So anyway, so in this kind of a pandemic susceptible, climate changing world, the economy as well as our food systems need to be transformed. We cannot go about tweaking with fortification and such. That leads me to the next one, corporate solutions, because we have to look at entrepreneurship. We have to look at individual enterprises. And here's another way in which we can realize diversity. When we look at small farmers, when we look at diverse cropping across the place by different communities, by different people, as it's conducive to them, according to their constraints, according to their resources, we essentially have a diverse ecosystem. So something is bound to survive. It's going to be a much more healthy ecosystem, even in terms of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And that's why I feel nutritional diversity through food sources, natural food sources, rather than fortification is important. And millets, of course, bring in so many more components than the other food grains that we have seen in the nutrition chapter. And the last aspect, and as you figured out, the long-term and the short-term, perspectives when we look at nutritional diversity versus fortification. But the last one that I would like to explain or spend a minute on is this whole aspect of skill development. Now, whenever we talk of increasing diversity, the first thing or the reason that we have lost a lot of our diversity is because we wanted to make things simple. And we really have to understand simple for whom, because the whole process of simplification has been for quote unquote the supply chain, the processing, or the market, or the dumbed down thing of you don't worry about your food, just take this packet and cook it. You don't have to worry about what is in it. Just go with my brand. This one brand, if you take, you're fine. That's not the way life works. Life is complicated. In trying to simplify these things, we have de-skilled people, from consumers to processors to traders to producers. Everyone has been de-skilled in this process of simplification. This simplification is required purely from an engineering perspective, and it needs to be done by engineers. But as society, as policymakers, as agronomists, as consumer rights people, as people who care about our food, simplification is not the solution. We have to reskill our population. And that reskilling is possible only when we look at it in terms of a food system and diversity, rather than in in a corporate technocratic solution of fortification. So that brings me to my last slide, I believe, or oh, I have a couple more. Okay, please go on to the next one. So what is agrobiodiversity? I think something got messed up here. This slide should have been there earlier, but anyway, I'm sorry. There was some goof up here. So there are multiple philosophies by which we are trying to realize this diversity that I was referring to: natural farming, permaculture, sustainable farming, low external input, sustainable agriculture, various forms. And all these have this common aspect of reskilling, of getting connected back to nature, of trying to understand what our food is, where our food is coming from. And the importance is also to look at beyond myself, look in the long term. And this this slide was more from a producer perspective. So, encourage thinking and planning in the long-term perspective rather than just this crop. How will I get the maximum yield from this crop has invariably driven today's farming paradigm. And we need to change that and look long-term as to how we can, have multiple crops like this farm in Kadri, probably about 6 years ago. And and close the nutrient loop. That's so important when we think of sustainability. Let's go to the next one. So what we would like to do is recognize, or what I would like to leave with you as a message is a recognition that diversification is inevitable. We might resist it because of other interests, but diversification is inevitable, whether it is in the agro-bio context, whether it is in the food security, sovereignty context, or in terms of the nutritional context. We need to diversify. Now, while we are doing that, what are we trying to achieve? We are trying to build in resilience to survive disasters, shocks, etc., whether it is natural or man-made. And it's not, there's a reason I put that as man-made, given my own gender politics. And I'm very particular about that. We recognize that there is a man always involved with any kind of large-scale disasters, especially economic disasters. And in this course of correcting and rebuilding our diversity in our food and food systems, bringing back millets is one of the first steps. And a lot of you have already started doing that, and in various ways. And I'm really glad that we have so many folks joining us for this webinars to try to contextualize it and see it in the larger aspect of millets, and where does it fit in, how can I do what can I do, all those questions. So really glad about that. So some of those questions you will probably find answers. Let's go to the next slide. On some of our websites, the millet.org is one, millets.wordpress is another, rainfed.india.org. So millets.wordpress is a more generic one, which is much older. It hasn't seen much updating in the recent past, but we'll come to that again. It started by one of the pioneers in this field and a common friend of Shambhu and ours, Dinesh. And Rainfed India is, of course, the website of the RRA network. So we cannot take a piecemeal approach. We have to, be bold and take some strong decisions. But this has to be consultative. This has to be a democratic process. It cannot be an autocratic process. It cannot be an individual-driven process. It has to be a community-centric process. And we really need to realign our food systems. And I'm hoping that a lot of you will go back to take these aspects to your own lives in terms of your food choices, in terms of the things that you work on, the things that you talk about with your friends, with your family, or the policies that you comment on, whether it is government policy or a corporate policy. Which price rise would you oppose? Which budgetary outlay would you support? Stuff like that. We really need to engage in these aspects. And I shall end my presentation there, and it's over to you, Dr. Shambhu.
Thank you very much, Vijay, for a very insightful overview of the issues related to agrodiversity. I hope you're all able to hear me.
Just yes, we can.
Yeah.
Very clearly.
So what I'll do is, just make one or two comments and then open up for the questions. We've got quite a few questions that are there, and I think more might be coming. We've got a few on the Zoom chat, and a few perhaps on YouTube.
Disturbance I'm not able to make out. I don't know if it's my signal or your signal.
There is some disturbance actually.
Okay, is it better now?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try and speak closer to the, to the microphone.
Manish, can you come on and just confirm if it's my signal?
It's issue with the Shambhu Prasad, I think. So even for me, it was not audible. So can you come closer to the...
Yes. Is it better now?
Yeah, it's audible now. It's audible.
Okay. I'll try and be loud as well. So I was just saying, thanks a lot, Dwiji, for a big overview of the issues in diversity. And I'll just make one or two comments, but I think there are some very interesting questions that have come up, which we shall try and take up as much as we can. So I'll try and give more space for the questions. But broadly speaking, I think what Dwiji was trying to highlight is the issue of diversity. And there is, first of all, there's so much diversity amongst millets itself. So some say there's even a caste hierarchy amongst millets. So there's some minor millets and major millets. So there is, and you have to see millets not as only millets, millets in relationship with other crops. Sometimes there is intercropping. And also there's this question of diversity of practices. So as we have a revival of millets, there is one route which is trying to make millets essentially for the export market and so on. But equally, there is a strong attempt to try and have these as community-led initiatives, probably linked to the public distribution systems or even in a local kind of system. So one good example of that is in the district of Srikakulam, where people growing millets have been processing them and also supplying them to the local ICDS schools as nutritious supplements. So the other kind of option is that because the food that is served often in an Anganwadi is not so nutritious, I think Dwiji was referring to the attempts nowadays to biofortify rice and look at millets more from a fortification perspective. So I think there are various aspects to this. We can come back to more comments later. I'd like to first start with the question Mr. S.S. Roy has posted. And I think his question is an interesting one, which says, why is it that whenever we speak of millets, we kind of tend to link it to small and marginal farmers alone? So in a sense, going back to what Min was saying, why can't we, if we want it really universal, so the question seems to be, why is it that big farmers are not excited about millets? Vijay, you want to take that?
Yeah, of course. That's a very very important question that we need to find. I hesitate to find an answer because there's no one answer to this. There are multiple layers to this. And one of the primary things that we need to recognize is the historical context of millets. And to a large extent, today's context as well. See, millets grew with very little inputs. And the beauty of millets is the fact that even in a drought-like situation, you will get some yield out of it. You won't get a bumper yield just because you have a lot of resources, and you won't get nothing, which is the case with high-risk crops like paddy or wheat, where you put a lot of inputs, you get a lot of returns. Millets are not like that. The development of millets over the ages has been such that it works as part of an ecosystem. And if one thing fails, the other thing survives. So millets have always been the food and the crops of the poor, of the oppressed classes. And that's why I kept going back to that aspect of Adivasis, Aboriginals, tribal communities, and Dalits, because these were the foods of these communities. And these were the crops that were grown in marginal soils, not in rich soils. The rich soils were used for other crops, and even millets were part of such cycles too. But when the commercialization of food and food products started, and this is not just the Green Revolution, by the way, I feel that yes, Green Revolution did upset the cart a lot, but the rocking of the cart started a long time ago with the commercialization of food and food products beyond the local sphere. Once we started having trade in food commodities, we started seeing a value for the food which was not just derived by the producer or the consumer, but rather by an external entity called the market. So once you have market-centric approaches, the value of the food is no longer its intrinsic or nutritional or the communal value that we find in that local food system. It becomes the value that is derived in the marketplace. And that has driven agriculture over the last, at least, I mean, from whatever historical context that I have been, I have read and seen, extends at least about 500 to 800 years, when the trade in food and food grains were really started picking up. So this aspect of why millets are only of small and marginal farmers, because these were the people who could not access markets, and it didn't become like the other grains. Now, does small and marginal mean bad? No way. Small and marginal is where people live. It's only a small slice, like Min pointed out. 61% of the farming community, even to this date, survive on rain-fed crops, rain-fed lands. So, I mean, what was the number? I forgot the number on the productivity. We'll share that slide as well. So this aspect of small and marginal is not to be taken as an apologetic thing. When I say that we need to transform our food system, I don't just mean in terms of what we eat, how we bring it to market and things like that. It's also in terms of how we are promoting, what crops we are promoting, where we are promoting. We have to promote crops in that 60% of the land is not going to grow paddy. So the whole food security and the green revolution is only.
Sorry to interrupt you. I think we'll come back to this.
I'm sorry. I just kept going on and on.
Yeah, we've got some 15 more questions, but I'd like to take a slightly different take on your own response. I think the point essentially is that it has been small and marginal farmer-led traditionally. And I think if it has to become a movement, there should be scope for big farmers to also get interested in millets. And I think it's probably happening in a few instances as well. Historically, as you said, there have been reasons why millets have remained with small farmers. I think millets has been seen as an so-called inferior cereal, and therefore probably the more resource-endowed farmers have not been part of it. And therefore, and I think that relates to probably what Mumtaz has been suggesting, that I think, it's like calling them backward districts and calling them aspirational districts kind of makes a difference. So calling them a poor man's crop versus calling it a nutraceutical might make a difference, but that's a different issue. So I will park that question for now. I'd like to take up the next question, which is more specific. This is by Geetika. She says that people say that quinoa is a complete protein and therefore especially good for vegetarians. Millet, however, is not. So there is often this availability of quinoa, which is there quite a bit, and many people are going towards it. So just a straight comparison between quinoa and millets, your comments.
Yeah. So when we look at food and food nutrition, we have to put it in the context of a food system. And while millets are fairly localized, quinoa are not yet that localized. And I do not believe in a silver bullet, as in I don't think quinoa can solve our nutritional requirement. If we really are looking for proteins, pulses are a much better alternative than quinoa. Because if you just go back to the nutrition table, you will see that the protein in quinoa is comparable with the proteins in some of the millets. But what is important is that we should not try to derive everything from one particular aspect. So cereal grains invariably are our source of carbohydrates. They're not there to meet our protein requirement. So thank you, Fanish. So the first column is protein here, and you will see that it is 14 in quinoa and 12.5 in proso and 12 something in foxtail. So which is not bad, and sorghum is not bad either. 10 something, pearl is 11 something. So it's comparable. So or wheat for that matter is 11.8. So so I feel that looking at individual nutrients and deciding on our diet is not advisable, but diversification of our diet does not mean that we shun quinoa because it's foreign. It is foreign. It is just that we treat it as a foreign thing, not indulge in it every day. So I wouldn't recommend quinoa as a staple unless you're growing quinoa in your farm and processing it locally. But otherwise, I would strongly recommend that we have it, appropriately according to our resources and our limitation.
Thanks, Viji. I'll take up the next question from Kushi Kansara. So she's saying, can you please share or draw some light on the requirements on the type of soil and water for millets versus other cereals?
Good question. And a very important question, which actually we'll be dedicating a good part of another session on. This is going to be on the cultivation practices and cultivation of millets. But briefly, just to give you an idea, millets are not one grain. So as I mentioned earlier, there are multiple grains that form the bracket that we call as millets or labeled as millets. So there are different millets that are suitable for different terrain, different agroclimatic zones, different soils, different water availabilities. And not just that, but over time, we also see that if you just look around in your local space, around your farm, you will, I mean, not just cursory look, but rather do a deep dive, go sit with the old people there in the neighborhood and talk to them. You will actually get stories of what was grown in the nearby area, and that's probably where I would recommend you to start on what should I grow in my land, in my farm.
Okay, so I'll take the next question. There have been some questions about, having the presentations in place. Just to assure you that the RRA team will put it up in case some of it have been a bit delayed. You can be sure that these presentations will be available through the network, and you can share your email ID. So let's be less anxious about receiving the presentation.
Yeah. So the presentations are already posted live for the previous sessions. This session's presentation will be posted a few minutes after the session ends. There have been a few requests for sharing it in advance. I am guilty of not being able to do that, and I shall try. I mean, that was the idea in our plan, but in the last 3 sessions, I mean, until today, it has not been happening that I have been able to get it ready well in advance. Hopefully, it will change in the next following few sessions. So please accept my apologies for not sharing it in advance.
So the next question is from Professor MJ. So the question is, to add to the nutritional diversity and consequent diet quality, at what frequency should the wheat eating population include millets in the diet?
This is a very good question, because I strongly believe in gradual changes. I do not believe in sudden changes. What would that mean? That would essentially mean that we work it back into our diets and not just abandon wheat and jump into, foxtail millet or bajra or jowar or ragi. The reason I'm saying that is, for any change to be lasting, it has to be accepted by the people who are, changing. And anything that is brought about with fear, ये नहीं खाओगे तो मर जाओगे, अरे यार सब मरने ही वाले हैं. So I feel that it is important to contextualize food in the human psychology as well. And I strongly believe that individuals have to set their pace and be open to bringing in new things. It's not just about millets. It's about, greens has invariably become palak nowadays. I mean, there were at least some 40 other greens that I have eaten growing up. And today, if I go to the market, I can find probably 5 at the most. So it's not just with millets, but in everything else, that we need to bring in that concept of nutritional and food diversity. And the pace is basically set by my resources, my constraints, my limitations. So it is about thinking about these things and bringing it back and giving it the importance that it deserves, because better nutrition means better health and well-being. So yeah.
Thanks, Viji. I'll take up 2-3 questions that are kind of related to policy. I'm sure you have a separate session on it, but let's hear out those questions. One of which is, this is by Nikita Sangwan, including millets in PDS would require an adequate amount of it to be produced. So do we need a second green revolution in millets to enhance production? That's Nikita's question. Just hold on. I think we have a similar question on policy, which is relating to PDS.
Yeah.
Which one is that? Is there any government schemes to motivate farmers for cultivating millets? That is by Vaishali. And Sendil Kumaravel has a question on why is it that state governments are not taking initiative in promoting millets? For example, in Tamil Nadu, in Noon Meal scheme, millets couldn't find a place. And so I'm just clubbing these three together because they are kind of related to policies. And before you answer, I just want to mention that there is a lot of variation among states. So there is public procurement of millets in some states, but not so much in other states. There is also an attempt to include millets in public distribution and in Anganwadi in a few districts, etc. But you can explain a bit further.
Yeah. So do we need a second green revolution? Well, the reason I keep going back to paddy and wheat and referencing that not just in this session, but in the earlier sessions as well, and you will see this as a common theme going forward, is I strongly believe in learning our lessons from history and not repeating the mistakes. We have to change things, whether we call it a green revolution, transformation or whatever else, punaruchetan or some other word. It really does not matter. But what matters is how we go about it. What do we do? What is the context? What are the methods that we use? What are the directions? What are the milestones that we set? And that's where these policies become very important. Because what is important is that we have to do a long-term plan. While Green Revolution targeted production, it was very much focused on the next few years. It was not looking at what was happening to the soil, what was happening to the ecosystem, what was happening to the food system. So we are much smarter today, at least I hope we are, and I hope we don't make the same mistakes. So yes, we do need a drastic change, a huge reinvestment in our food systems, in our food production systems. And that's where the whole idea of not just bringing in procurement, but rather the various mechanisms that are needed to bring production to the levels where it would feed the masses, right? So this is also very important, and that's part of quote unquote green revolution policies. So paddy production was not so much when the green revolution started, or when PDS, paddy rice was introduced into PDS. So there were a lot of things that were done in order to bring production up to meet the requirements. So in that context, I really feel that we want to be learning our lessons and moving on rather than repeating the same mistakes. And in some sense, the third question highlights that we probably are not going far enough, because in many states, like Sendil rightly pointed out, and Shambhu sir also pointed out, some states are learning their lessons. They are introducing ragi. Ragi is basically finger millet, or they are encouraging millets cultivation with some focused mission, in mission mode, working in mission mode. So some efforts are going on, but in many other states, it's not happening, and it needs to happen. By the way, Tamil Nadu is one of the strongest millet markets today. And it's really sad that and next I would say is Karnataka. And in both these places, the governments in power today are really not going beyond looking at it as a market commodity and making it into a food systems intervention. So yes, there is a scope for a lot of work in this, and I'm glad that a lot of RRN partners in this network, RRN network, are working on these issues of bringing millets back both to the farm and to the PDS. And if you go to our website, you'll find more information, or feel free to contact one of us at RRA or the Millet Foundation, and we'll be able to refer you to more local resources and connect you, and probably have you join us in efforts to change policy.
Yeah, so I just want to add a little bit more to what Dwiji has said. I think the Green Revolution is a certain kind of way of looking at agriculture and issues of food security. And very often, especially, there is a talk of, yes, Green Revolution has worked in one or two places, but not in many parts of central and eastern India. So schemes tend to try and bring the same logic by saying having a scheme like bringing Green Revolution in eastern India. The discussion on agro-diversity is important because how do you actually bring diversity of production systems into the discourse on food security? And then we may not actually look at the Green Revolution paradigm. We may look at what is often referred to as the agro-ecological paradigm, which looks at a very different way of doing things.
Yes.
And I think we also need to appreciate today that unlike in, in the Green Revolution paradigm, we felt that if it was not happening in Punjab, it doesn't work in the rest of the country. We need to appreciate today that the solutions may not be coming just from Karnataka or Tamil Nadu or Andhra Pradesh or, Rajasthan or wherever it is being grown. Odisha can actually contribute in significant ways. The Odisha Millet Mission is an excellent example of how civil society organizations have worked closely with the government of India to try and redesign the system so that procurement has happened in a reasonable scale, without shortchanging farmers. So an earlier experiment has been done on procurement, but invariably the tendency was to shortchange the farmers growing millets. I'd like to move to the next question, which I think so two questions. One I think is easily answered by Shahzad Parbu. So this is about soil, and you could probably take it up in the next session as well. So the question is, isn't soil nutrition content also important for millets grown in it to be able to provide the kind and level of nutrients they provide? Could you give a quick answer to that?
Yes, very much so. Very much so. I mean, you can't have a depleted soil, or a highly chemicalized soil, or chemical laden soil, and expect that the crop is going to flourish. Yes, it is very much a factor, and that is why we need to bring back millets, because they nourish the soil and it's part of an ecosystem. It's not just bringing back one crop and doing a single monocrop field, but rather looking at it as a multi-crop, agro-biodiverse ecological approach, like Shambhu, you were highlighting earlier. So yes, it's not going to happen overnight. It has to be a process that is engaged with, and it's going to take some time, and we have to keep at it. And that's why I feel policy has to reflect that, and there have to be milestones that are identified and achieved in order for us to move in that direction.
Yeah, so the next question is from Mumtaz. So she's asking, can millets be based on the time of the year, grown in a particular season so that it has the best nutritional impact? Is that possible? Has it been tried out?
Yeah. Yes and no. As in, yes, because any seasonal food is the best food that you can eat. If it's non-seasonal, if it's out of season, having it as an indulgence is fine, but having it as a regular food is probably not fine because it's not sustainable. But in terms of nutrition, if we see, there are different grains, there are different meats that are available, there are different food sources available at different times of the year. Mushrooms is one classic example. I mean, mushrooms are abundant in the post-monsoon time and taper off very quickly. But you will recognize that this is also the time when very few of the greens are available in the market. Because of the rains, none of the greens survived the fields. And so mushrooms used to be part of a lot of communities' diets, but today is lost because of various chemicals that we are pouring into our soils. And so what I'm trying to say is that even among millets, there are seasons and there is a seasonal relevance to our food choices, but it is not like one has to remember it. It is just that as we get more and more connected with the overall production system, with ecology, even as consumers, we will be able to relate to what is seasonal and what isn't. And that's very important, I feel.
So we'll take one or two more questions. The first one I'd like to take is, going back to Mr. Roy, why are we not providing eco-service to the millet landrace conservators, since they are preserving the most nutritious grains to the society?
Beats me. I mean, I don't have anything. I mean, see, typically the people who are conserving these land races are the smallest and the most marginal of farmers. They are the most unassuming of farmers. They do not have degrees. They do not even have, very likely, they don't even have a smartphone. If at all they have a phone. So, yeah, I mean, we should, and hopefully things will change. Some organizations over the last decade have started honoring and recognizing a lot of these things. But we also need to recognize that this is not just a matter of conservation. It is a matter of food and food systems. And it is necessary that we do recognize that there are various land races, and that's something that is good in, let's say, Araku Valley, is not going to be great in the, in the Niyamgiris, which is not too far from Araku, but has a very different ecosystem. So the recognition, which aspect, this aspect I touched upon in the whole skill development point that I made earlier. We need to recognize that there are already a lot of skills that are still surviving, and try to nurture them and spread or provide avenues for those to be imparted to others as well. Yeah, that's anything you would like to add, Shambhu, because you yourself have worked quite a bit on this aspect.
I think this, when the nation is celebrating different kinds of warriors, I think we do have to have a certain kind of celebration of these kinds of eco conservators, not warriors necessarily.
Yes,
and I think
yes, please. Yeah,
there's a good move. I just wanted to, indicate that this time Padma Shri actually went much further, and one of the conservators of land races has actually, at least there's one from Odisha and surely one from a person who's part of the women's movement in Maharashtra. I'm forgetting her name right away. I think there's a slight and subtle change in the Padma Shris where there is a certain recognition, but I think it's still a small drop in the ocean. The numbers that we are speaking of is very high. I'd like to kind of, we probably have answered many questions. Okay, we'll take this last one, which is just coming from Girija Srinivasan. In multiple cropping systems, how many types of crops can be grown together? What's the proportion of millets to other crops? Girija has caught you.
Yeah, no.
We've lost you.
Gigi lost your connection.
I'm really happy. How many questions yet? So thank you, Girija. You just made my day.
Dviji.
Okay. Is it better now?
Yes. We are able to. We've started hearing you.
Is it better now?
Yes.
Go
ahead.
Can you hear me?
Please pause your switch off this video. Vijay?
Feeling, nobody asked the how many questions so far. And it's about diversity, and how come nobody thought about that? So thank you. The how many question is also answered by our resources and our limitations. There are, I mentioned about the Araku Valley. Araku Valley, I have seen farms where there are 14 to 15 different crops grown in a small.
We've lost you again, Dviji. I think we'll
1 cent of land. And
Dviji, I think the recommendation is that you should probably turn off your video so that we can hear you better. We are not able to hear you consistently.
Okay, is this better now?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. So I'll just continue, or do you want me to go back and
just quickly? I think we're running out on time.
So just a quick thing. It's a matter of limitations and.
Well, I think we've lost you again. Dviji will try and take this up. We are losing you, Dviji. So let's just park this question, if that's all right. Um, yeah, so I'd like to just take a couple of minutes, and I think we have, tried responding to most of the questions. Sanstanji, I'm very sorry that, Dwiji, perhaps the recommendation here is that the kinds of words you use is too heavily focused on an English audience. Maybe you could try and combine a bit in Hindi as well. So maybe you should take this suggestion seriously as you move into your next set of presentations. So thanks for the feedback, Sanstanji. I think there are many questions that have been answered. Lakshmi had a question which I'm sure can be taken up again. So she said she posted a question in the previous session, and due to time constraint, it was not taken up. And can it be taken now? So maybe that in the next session, you could even start off by taking one or two questions that didn't get completely answered this time. Yeah, Patangi Rambabu has a question on, can we focus some light on small millets plus oilseed plus pulses in terms of a biodiverse farming models? One possibility which I would encourage the RRA team to do is to try and see if some of these questions can be followed up by responding directly or in the RRA network if some of them are members. But these are questions that will need a few links, and there is information on it. We can't take this up right away. We don't seem to have been done at 4:15. Sanjay Patil has a question from Bayaf, Maharashtra. In Palghar district, Wadli and Kokna tribals are conserving 20 finger millets and 10 little millet land races. Millet cropping system is about 10, 12 different crops. Thanks for the information, Sanjay. I'd like to try and just quickly summarize some of the discussions today. I think Dwiji was trying to focus a lot on understanding millets. Millets need to be looked at within this context of diversity. He tried explaining to us this concept of diversity both from the biophysical point of view as well as the production systems point of view, and also in terms of the markets and how we look at diversity, even in the way we look at it. So whether it should be holistic or reductionist, do we just tweak the system or do we work towards a transformation? Are we likely to set this millet system in the hands of a few large firms or corporates, or do we try and promote entrepreneurs at a local level? Do we want to keep ourselves production centric in terms of, or do we would like to make it much more community centric? And he also raised this important issue of skilling. And just to place this in perspective, one of the major contributions of Green Revolution is what is often referred to as the de-skilling process that farmers have undergone. And the de-skilling process is much, much more. Today's farmers know much less than their father's generations or their mother's generation. And I think one of the major things that agroecology actually does, because of the reduction on inputs from external crops and other areas, knowledge is intensive. It actually leads to a certain kind of empowering and reskilling of the farmers. And I think this concept of reskilling is something all of us interested in millets would like to take up. And he did speak about trying to look at this from a longer term perspective and not just as a short term perspective. And I'd just like to end with some of the comments that have also come in saying that, today millets, for many of us who've been with this for quite some time, the way we heard of millets 15 years back or 20 years back and the way we understand millets today, the market demands are changing. And many of you have rightly pointed out that, we need recipes that come out in a different manner. I remember one of the gentlemen who now has a factory called EHA coming from Odisha, which is into juices, looked at the millet system and said, why can't, the real product I'd like to have is millet in chicken broth, which of course might not have been so exciting for other people. So there's a lot of scope for innovations. And I'm sure we'll take this up later. Innovations, not just in products, in processes, in organizational systems, and in the way we think about our own lives. So I'd like to thank all the participants and Dwiji for an excellent session and a very informative one. and the RRA network for hosting the third of this series on Know Your Millets. Over to you, Dwiji, and others, Fanish and others.
Yeah, thank you, Shambhu, and thank you everyone for joining us for this session. The next session is going to be on the 13th, and then every third day. So please check out our website, themillet.org, and you'll be able to find a link to the webinar series. And sign up if you haven't, and circulate the videos. There were requests for presentations. There were requests for question answers. These are all posted on the website right now. You can go and look at the first cut of replies to the questions that were shared with us in the earlier sessions. But given the feedback that we have received now, we are going to do some quick videos on our RRA network channel with answers to these questions, specifically as a conversation, and we will work out the logistics of that so that it's available. And my apologies for the language constraint. I have remained talking mostly in English, though I used a few Hindi words here and there. I don't know. I mean, I can use more Hindi. I can also use more Kannada or Telugu, or to some extent Tamil as well. So I don't know where I would please and hurt others. So my apologies to anyone who felt left out. We are making these presentations available for anyone to translate. It's on a free to use license. You can even use it for a commercial purpose if you want to, as long as you share a like and you attribute to where you got this material from. So please feel free to translate this and circulate it among your friends, or just circulate it as is. They're all available on the website. So thank you, and we'll meet again in another 3 days. And please spread the word. We would like to see more and more people join us for these and grow the millet tribe, as they say. Thank you, everyone. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Fanish, and everyone else.